Greetings. Thank you guys for tuning in for another video. Trust that you're glad to see me, so I'm glad to see you. So I wanted to take some time to discuss another great book, just giving some thoughts and opinions on this, and also I'm going to be making some remarks about philosophy and history, so hang tight for that. But before I do, let's go ahead and introduce the book. This is The Story of Philosophy, written by Will Durant, originally published in 1926. And despite the fact that this book is nearly a century old, it still remains a valuable resource for anybody interested in philosophy and history. Now, before we proceed, let me mention something. I love any presentation, especially any book, that defies stereotypes and cliches. All right? So you think philosophy and history. How much more boring can you get? Right? Couple that with the fact that philosophy has a reputation of being one of the most obscure, inaccessible, and altogether useless subjects. And this book could not seem more unappealing. Yet, as I intend to showcase in just a bit, this book is actually a refreshing rebuttal to all those stereotypes and cliches. Now, I want to address that also infamous yet somewhat valid sentiment or opinion that philosophy is useless, or that philosophy is highly inaccessible. I could not disagree more. You see, if I can cut straight to the chase, I think that it's inevitable, for every single one of us, that we encounter certain situations, certain circumstances in life that prompt certain inquiries, that we are confronted with certain questions, and that these questions and these inquiries often fall within the domain of philosophy, whether we realize it or not. Okay? Now, here's the thing. Whether we like it or not, we do not exist in a vacuum. That is, in a historical sense. We are the successors of people who have come before us, people who have made contributions, whether good or bad. And most of those contributions have come in the form of ideas. Ideas that have shaped and influenced and resulted in the situations and circumstances of the world as it is today. For that reason, it is incredibly important to understand not just the past in the sense of what happened, but why and how it happened. And philosophy, I think, offers us a very unique vantage point for doing just this. For not just examining ourselves, but examining our collective self. And some of you who are familiar with Socrates probably know that I'm merely espousing a quote by him: "The unexamined life is not worth living." Right? So, with all that out of the way, hopefully I've conveyed to you in some degree why philosophy is useful and not just, just all this dibble-dabble gibberish talk. Let me go ahead and introduce you to Will Durant himself, in case you don't know who he is. Will Durant was an American philosopher who is actually, I think, most well remembered for his contributions to history rather than philosophy. Namely, an 11-volume series that he co-authored with his wife Ariel Durant, entitled The Story of Civilization, which was highly successful and hugely famous. Pretty sure some of you probably even know about it. And basically, they chronicled the history of Western society, right? And so anyway, Will Durant is easily one of the most enchanting and captivating writers that I've come across, and he now, at the moment, has a very special place in my heart. But without further ado, I want to actually talk about the book itself and sort of express some things that I liked about it, as well as a few things I didn't like about it, in an attempt to give you an overall understanding of its content, and also whether it's a worthy investment of your time if you're interested in reading it. So I want to talk a little bit about what I think is the most notable quality of it, which is its accessibility, and then I want to talk a bit about the comprehensiveness of it, or the lack thereof. And then I want to talk a little bit about the organization structure. And then lastly, I'm going to be making a final verdict between this book and Bertrand Russell's History of Western Philosophy. And the reason I'm doing that is because, as you may have already noted, this is a very specialized subject, that is the history of Western philosophy. And so for that reason, it might be useful to know how this book measures up to similar books, okay? So anyway, let me begin by discussing the accessibility of it. By accessibility, I mean how easy would it be for someone who has little to no background in philosophy to pick this book up, read it, and comprehend its contents? I think it performs excellently in this category. So that's not to say that reading the entire book would be a breeze for somebody who has little to no background in philosophy. That's simply to say it would be a huge disservice to not mention the fact that Will Durant seemed to, on the one hand, possess such a rich, deep, and vast understanding of history, philosophy, culture, economics, science, literature, technology, all these different fields, right? And at the same time, was so humble and straightforward and concise and clear and down to earth in his presentation, right? He understood that there's a need for mediators, that is, mediators between people who are so highly specialized and niche in their fields, as opposed to people who, despite being literate, see all the technicality and the jargon, all the riffraff, so to speak, as a barrier to learning and understanding whatever subject, and in this case, philosophy. And so anyway, Will Durant is, I think he performs exceptionally well at pacing his discussions of every philosopher that he discusses, all the ideas, the content of those ideas, certain terminology. He is generous with providing direct quotations and paraphrasing so as to make sure that nothing is left to ambiguity or vagueness. I mean, really, I don't think you could ask for a more clear and down-to-earth, yet still captivating presentation on the history of philosophy. I mean, it really is a work to behold in that sense. However, the one critique that I do have about this book is its lack of comprehensiveness, which I kind of alluded to earlier. And what I mean by that is, with respects to the entire history of philosophy, that is Western philosophy, which has a history spanning about 2,500 years, obviously there's a lot of ground to cover. Will Durant acknowledged straightforwardly at the beginning of his book that this is not a complete history of philosophy, right? In his own words, there's an inadequate treatment of some thinkers, of some ideas and concepts, and of certain periods in philosophy. The one that stood out the most to me, the one which was the most glaring and obvious, was the period of medieval philosophy. So actually, if you read the book, you'll see that he sets up his story of philosophy, discussing the context and situations of ancient Greece. He then devolves into a discussion of Plato and Aristotle, and then from Aristotle, he skips all the way to Francis Bacon. That's a lot of philosophy's history that is omitted or not covered in this book. Yet, in his defense, again, he acknowledges straightforwardly that it's not a complete history of philosophy. That's one. But two, in his estimation and in the estimation of many people, it isn't exactly important, at least not from the get-go, for somebody who's just getting introduced to philosophy to have an understanding of what was going on during the medieval period. In many people's estimations, and I know this is somewhat controversial, something that I think a lot of those who are fans of the scholastic philosophers would probably try to jump down my throat for saying this, and I'm not espousing this opinion, but this seems to be what's reflected by Will Durant himself. It seems that this period of philosophy was a period of stagnation, a period of no development, right? Little development. And so that is primarily why it seems like Will Durant left it out, right? He obviously thinks that there are certain personalities or characters within the history of philosophy that are really, really, really important and cannot be overlooked, and that's who he seems to include in his presentation. And so that's what you get. That's the simplest way I can put that. He does include some of the biggest key players. Despite that, he leaves out a lot of the big key players. Like, he devotes sections or chapters to one thinker. He discusses certain biographical facts or details about that thinker, the ideas that they had, certain works that they wrote, the influence that they've had on subsequent generations. He also provides interpretations and criticisms for certain thinkers. So there's really well-rounded discussions going on within this book. But again, the thing is if you take a philosopher like Descartes or Locke, Hume, Berkeley, Hegel, like these philosophers, they don't have a chapter dedicated to them. They're discussed in the book, but they're not given the same attention that the philosophers who are included do. Okay, hope that came across clearly. Now, as to the final verdict, which is better, the story of philosophy or the history of Western philosophy by Bertrand Russell? And I know some of you may be familiar. There are even more books on this subject. I believe Anthony Kenny has a history of Western philosophy, as well as Copleston has one. I haven't read either of those. I've only read Russell's and Durant, so that's the only comparison I'm making. In short, I think that Durant does some things better than Russell. Russell does some things better than Durant. Namely, Russell's history is more comprehensive. It is also more challenging. It is also more of an investment of time and effort. So if perhaps I've summed it up far too brief. Durant's book is more accessible and easy for a first-time or beginner to comprehend and to understand and to engage with, and see how the subject of philosophy itself is not this obscure and inaccessible thing, right? But rather something which is relevant and significant to everyday life, as well as in developing an understanding of where we stand in human history. So that's my verdict. Durant succeeds in some aspects, whereas Russell succeeds in others. But overall, Durant's my boy. So, all right, that's it. Thank you guys again for tuning in. If you have any questions, comments, critiques, leave them down in the comment section below. Let me know if you liked this video. If you liked it, like it. If you disliked it, dislike it. And until next time, bye-bye.